Good evening, St. Lucia, and welcome to another Town Hall Tuesday. I'm your host, Mondi Lewis, Communications Officer for the St. Lucia Labour Party. This evening, I have with me the candidate for Ancillary Canneries, Mr. Wayne Gerard, and also the Research Officer and commentator, Mr. Calix George Jr. with me. Tonight, we'll be speaking about an array of issues, and I know, St. Lucians, that you are overwhelmed if you are like me with the number of issues going on in St. Lucia. Just today, we saw this outbreak of COVID-19 at the correctional facility. We saw prisoners going live. We saw what we see as rubber bullets being fired into the compound, and I just thought overall it was a really tough day for St. Lucians. And on top of that, you had an address to the nation by the Prime Minister, which was woefully lacking. St. Lucians needed that hope, St. Lucians needed that reassurance. And once again, we see no leadership coming from this government. But let's get right into our topics with our panelists. And just to take you back, because we really need to give this some perspective, we saw Honorable Philip J. Pierre giving us a 7-point rescue plan. And that, St. Lucia, is leadership. A rescue plan which is much needed, which we needed from the Prime Minister and we didn't hear. But I'd like you to tune in and just listen once again to the address by Honorable Philip J. Pierre, Leader of the Opposition. Okay, our clip isn't ready, so let's go straight into the debate. Mr. George has prepared some statistics for us, and I'm not sure if St. Lucians right now, Calix will join me on set. Calix, could you take us through what's the current situation? Because I know you have done a lot of research on this. What is the current situation of this COVID-19 crisis that we're facing in St. Lucia? What the numbers tell us, what our rates are like, and just give us the overall view of where we are today.
Right. Well, thank you so very much, Mondi, and of course, good night to all listeners. It's a pleasure to be able to have this opportunity to share as part of this panel, along with Mr. Wayne Gerard as well, regarding the current COVID-19 situation that we're facing. Of course, it's been about a year now since the World Health Organization declared that COVID-19 was certainly a health concern of international proportion. I think it was January the 30th, in fact, where that announcement came. And then by March, in fact, it was declared a pandemic. Clearly, we have been speaking about COVID-19 for quite a lot of time now. I know a lot of people have become we're experiencing COVID fatigue. Not only because, of course, it's been in the news, it's been everywhere, every turn, but it has certainly transformed our lives completely in terms of things that we used to see as very distant. You know, we'd go on and maybe watch CNN or BBC and you see these images of Hong Kong and Beijing and seeing these thousands and thousands of people all wearing masks. And we thought, wow, you know, why are they doing that? Is it just because of the pollution? But the Asian countries have certainly had a much stronger experience and hardship, really, with respect to outbreaks in the past, things like H1N1, SARS, and swine flu. But this is the first time that we here in the Caribbean have had to face it so intimately. I mean, we've seen what happens sometimes in Ebola, in Africa, and again, it felt very different and distant. But the fact that it has now come and we've seen it spread so very quickly across the world to so many countries, barring only a few maybe in the Pacific, it certainly has transformed our lives. And unfortunately, we went in a state of lack of preparedness. Because when you think about the past 4.5 years, unfortunately, when you've seen the approach towards healthcare, in particular in the country, we've seen what appears to be a greater interest on profiteering than actual healthcare. And the priority seems not to be about ensuring that people have the best quality healthcare that they have. And so all these issues that we've been dealing with healthcare, whether it's the St. Jude Hospital, and we saw how that went on, delayed for over 4 years, and finally, the call and the cry by the current administration was that you had it for 4.5 years and you weren't able to complete it. They've now had it for more than 4.5 years. And with the time that they were there before, of course, under the King administration, when you think about it, nearly, 7 years now. And then to come in, to find a facility so vital to 66,000 people in the southern part of our island and nearing completion, 6 to 9 months away, and to simply stop a project within a month of coming in. And now only to see direct awards and a new project, more concrete being poured, and clearly no end in sight towards what was going on there. We can only say that profit took control of St. Jude Hospital. And then you saw what happened with the Owen King EU Hospital. It was on ice for the very longest while. In fact, that was perhaps only one of the good things about COVID coming, is that we finally got to see the opening of the Owen King EU Hospital, because we were forced to do so. But before that, we saw Health City came in, we saw attempts at privatization, and all sorts of excuses were given why we could not move into the OK EU Hospital. And within a few months of COVID-19, it happened. Mm-hmm. And it happened through the hard work of local professionals, local St. Lucians, who made it happen and who could always made it happen. And then when we were promised, well, we know about universal healthcare, and it got rebranded as National Health Insurance, which is really just a financing mechanism for universal healthcare. But that's what it became, the whole conversation about national health insurance. And then again, we saw this idea as to how can we profit off healthcare? And that whole idea regarding can we bring in private insurers into this whole thing for providing national health insurance? So unfortunately, we've had almost 4 years where we've seen an administration attempting to make a profit of protecting lives. And then you have COVID-19 hitting. And it has certainly changed the complete situation as it was. And we've been fairly fortunate. And I say fortunate because when you look back at the experiences in the very early period around March and April, we were lucky to have decisions being made for us. For instance, with the United States closing their borders, France closing their borders and effectively closing us off from Martinique. And so that in fact protected us from, and in fact made decisions in our best interest, because had those decisions not been made, we seem not to be in a position to make them for ourselves. It actually helped us and isolated us for a very long time. And so we were fairly successful, of course, but then the desire again to see a return to profitability. And don't get me wrong, listeners and Mondi and the panel, it is of course important that we have to protect livelihoods, we have to get people back into economic activity. But this government, our government, has in fact has received $320 million Eastern Caribbean dollars worth of borrowing, loans, which were given from a number of multilateral agencies, from the IMF, from the World Bank, from the Caribbean Development Bank, from the Import-Export Bank of the Republic of China, a lot of assistance, even from the ECCB. And that money is not for other projects. This is not money that was given for the dam or for the airport or anything like that. This was COVID-19 money, which was meant to provide support for your healthcare and support for income support for your people, so that they can in fact be able to pivot away from the realities that the world's biggest impacted sector, that is travel and tourism, was going to be hit. It was going to be hit for a very long time. And so when we now see that the Prime Minister has come on today and is announcing, well, we've spent $8 million on income support, we have to ask ourselves,
Guys, but I want to stick a pin here, honestly. And as you're speaking about all the money that has been allocated for COVID-19 relief, and the Prime Minister saying that it was $8 million was used and we received $500 and whatever odd million dollars. St. Lucians, I see a lot of arguments as to we can't afford to close down the borders because people have to work. People need their livelihoods. But as you're rightfully saying, there was money allocated to prepare us and to give us that economic support that we need. And I want to ask Wayne, has anybody from your constituency received that money? Do you think that people have been given that kind of support that is needed, especially in these economic times?
Good evening, viewers. Good evening, the constituents of Answer and Canaries. We have not received it. In fact, we've suffered even disproportionate to everyone else. For example, we had a ambulance available to the people of Canaries. It has mysteriously disappeared. No one knows where it's gone. During the lockdown, I wonder if you could remember that there was a situation where the public facilities were shut down without any prior consultation with the members of the public of Answer and Canaries. There was also the situation of there just generally being no consultation at all. The question that I really want to ask this evening, Mondi, if I may, is on the heels of the address by Mia Mottley, the address by Roosevelt Skerritt of Dominica, the address by Boris Johnson in the UK, one would expect some sort of sympathy, compassion, and some value for life coming out of the Prime Minister. But we have yet to see that. We've yet to see a concrete plan as to how we're going to deal with this very, very real and serious situation. And like the rest of the general public, I was hoping tonight that we would get some more clarity into what the Prime Minister's plan is. But I've, like you and like the rest of St. Lucia, have been left wanting for some sort of meat in terms of what and how he intends to proceed going forward. So no, we have not benefited from this sort of stimulus that he seems to be referring to. I mean, the only thing it stimulated was the fancy of the friends, family, and undeserving foreigners, but certainly not the people of St. Lucia.
Indeed, and as you're speaking about a plan, political leader Honorable Philip J. Pierre did give a plan to St. Lucians, which I spoke about at the beginning of the show. So we will now go to that 7-point rescue plan for St. Lucia. This is what St. Lucians really wanted to hear at this time, but sadly, that is the substance of government from Alan Chastney.
Despite this, the St. Lucia Labour Party, recognizing the extent of the COVID-19 crisis in St. Lucia at this time, is again presenting to the country a 7-point action plan to confront the COVID pandemic. Our proposals as follows. 1. Expand the testing and tracing. 2. Expand treatment capacity. 3. Rethink travel and tourism measures. 4. Revise the partial shutdown. 5. Protect our education sector. 6. Quickly implement a vaccination program. And 7. Implement an economic and social relief program.
Yes, St. Lucia, this is a plan. The Prime Minister this evening has come and said to St. Lucians that we will get vaccines, and great. We were waiting to hear, we have been waiting to hear when a vaccine program would be rolled out in St. Lucia. And we know that is probably our only hope for some sort of normalcy. However, the Prime Minister has limited our outtake or our rollout of the vaccine through COVAX, and he said that we were going to get, Calix, remind me, 74,000 doses?
That's correct, yeah.
And that includes 2 doses. But could you explain, because it doesn't mean that 74,000 people are going to be vaccinated.
Right. So we're getting AstraZeneca vaccines, and those are 2-dose vaccines similar to Moderna as well as Pfizer. The only 1-dose one that I know of that's somewhere close to being available is by Johnson. So effectively, when you're talking about 74,400 doses, that really is coverage for about 37,200 people, which works out to be about 20% of the overall population. And that, of course, is being donated through the World Health Organization's COVAX program. What a number of other countries have, of course, done, very proactive countries, in fact, even Dominica, I think, has written to the government of India for support. We've seen a similar thing with Mia Mottley in Barbados trying to get out of India, which is effectively like the pharmacy of the world. They've got the most production of vaccines pharmaceutical products in the world. And you're already seeing, and of course, a part of the world that Mr. Gerard knows very well in the Indian Ocean, the island of the Seychelles. Small island developing states, 100,000 people, dependent on tourism just like us. And they've already started rolling out vaccination since, I think, January the 10th. And how they've been able to do so? Through trying to get donations from the UAE, from India, from China. And certainly we need to have a more vigorous and proactive approach in terms of looking at this issue of vaccines. Because clearly, what we're getting is not enough. It's good that we're getting something, and let's hope we can get it as quickly as possible. But the shortest path to be able to tackle the current situation that we have is to certainly try as much as possible to voluntarily get people to actually go out and vaccinate and get immunized.
But vaccination, like Honorable Philip JPS said, should come with education because people are reading a lot. Persons, the amount of information that is coming out, just that we've bombarded by, there is a certain apprehension from certain sections and just normal persons about taking the vaccine. And I really believe that the government is now charged with a duty to educate the population on who, how, what are the effects, and just how, the country will benefit from being vaccinated.
But Mondi, if I could just make one point, please. And again, because with a lot of these conversations, the importance, I know it's a public health issue, but we are starving our healthcare. That's what's going on right now. We have a lack of appreciation that health is wealth. And so we think that health is just some social issue that gets pushed on the side, right? We've, again, $320 million from all these multilateral agencies raised from COVAX. We can, with just $3.5 million, cover the cost of all vaccination, right? For bringing in enough doses into this country. For just $3.5 million. That's about 1% of the money that we've received so far. So we need to be doing a lot more in terms of proactive investment in healthcare. That's not happening right now, and we're feeling it. The frontline workers are feeling it. Everybody right about now is feeling it, and that's the problem. We have to be willing to make that investment in people and their health.
But in all of this conversation, where is the Foreign Affairs Minister? Rather curious that we've not heard anything from the Foreign Affairs Ministry in any efforts to go out and proactively secure vaccines for the people of St. Lucia. It's as if it's continuous disjointed approach to resolving the matter or dealing with the issue of COVID. And it still seems to be lacking in terms of how the government is approaching this pandemic.
Okay. And Mr. Gerard, we have these, sometimes I think, think tanks or speak in vacuums. You're someone who are with the people of Ancillary Canneries. What is the reception? What are people's fears? What are people saying about the COVID-19 pandemic? Are people willing to take the vaccine within your constituency? Do people even know that the government, and I mean, today is not the first day that they spoke about a vaccine program. What has been the feedback from your constituents?
There's a general distrust in the government. If a government embarks upon overnight criminalizing fishermen, preventing ordinary people from accessing a public washroom facility without consultation, anything the government says beyond that will always be received with a bit of skepticism. So there is a very element of distrust that the government needs to work upon in terms of convincing people, because they believe that this is some game played by Alan Chastanet, and he doesn't really care about the people of St. Lucia. He only pretends to care. He doesn't really care. So there is some education that needs to take place, and some confidence building in what the government has to say about dealing with this COVID situation.
Indeed.
If I might just chip in here, because we're speaking about ancillary in a little bit here, and the issue of tourism. I mean, this is the member of parliament. He's currently the Minister for Tourism, and is in fact also the chair of the command center. Right now, after this massive wave of people coming in the month of December, right? Hotels right about now are not doing very well. That's the reality. Numbers are down, occupancy levels are down. I think I was trying to find out what was the state of a hotel and its occupancy in that very same constituency of ancillary below 20% occupancy right about now, right? This is the reality of what we're dealing with. And this is because all these source markets, the United Kingdom, Canada, they've closed their borders. Canada is closed for the next 90 days. I mean, we even lost flights even before they began closing. That's the reality of it. And countries are looking to see how they can protect themselves. And we have to be willing to be able to protect ourselves. Nobody else is going to do it for us. Sometimes we're lucky and we benefit, as is the case of right now. But you're seeing that we're talking about this industry, and we all want it to come back. But at the same time, we have to make sensible public health decisions to be able to protect our country. And what we have right now clearly has shown not to work. I mean, the Prime Minister, thankfully, took some time off from his campaigning, going into Saltibus and looking at roads all over the place and all that he's doing in his bright yellow shirt, and delivered an address tonight. And certainly I think there were thousands of people who were listening to him and were hoping to hear that there was going to be some clear idea, not just about putting out the current fire that we have, but to make sure that the fire that is burning can also not return. Because what sense does it make if we are going to have a situation where we manage to control what we have, which of course is not happening right about now, it's out of control. But let's say that we can do it, and in 2 months' time we have another outbreak. What sense does that make?
But Calix,
And
even
so-
the what he proposed tonight, for instance, visitors to St. Lucia will now require a PCR test within 5 days rather than 7 days. I mean, the world started by telling you that 72 hours. What is the insistence on just not following? Is it a matter that he doesn't want to hear I told you so? He doesn't want to take he doesn't want to give the opposition credit for suggesting something that is a world standard? What is the hesitation by this Prime Minister to just do what is right in the interest of St. Lucians?
In all of this, it will be very curious to find out this Christmas season tourist boom, as they like to put it. Is it new money? Is it people who recently booked their travel plans to come to St. Lucia? Or is it people who booked months before, even almost a year before, and are unable to get a refund from the establishment, and the government is just simply trying to facilitate those guests coming in so that there isn't a refund to be issued? And that's the real question. Is it really new money? Are we actually benefiting from them coming in, or is it simply delivery of what was already agreed? As in, I've already paid for my vacation. I'm not going to stay away, particularly if I don't have to do a second test. And if I have to do the second test, who's going to be paying for it? So there's quite a bit of issues that I think the chairman of the command center and the Minister of Tourism needs to clarify in terms of what the thinking is about continuing and letting people come into this country.
But interestingly enough, Wayne, the political leader and members of the executive met with the SLHTA on Sunday. The St. Lucia Labour Party was invited to a Zoom meeting with directors. And from all indications, hotels are willing to institute the second testing. So I don't understand, again, what the preoccupation by Alan Chastanet is, that he just really does not care about the lives of St. Lucians.
Yep.
That's what I could come up with.
I mean, Mondi, if we're going to go out there and make statements that we're going to follow the science, it's clear that we're not doing that right about now. We're not following the science. Because the science would tell you that you either have a very hard and strict quarantine period between 10 and 14 days, right? In the case of the UK, they do 10, but most people, they would say the recommended is 14, and this is because of the incubation period of the virus. This is a scientifically fixed thing after studies and research has been done. So that's one aspect. And then the other aspect is, if you want to be able to shorten that, you have to ensure that there is testing during that quarantine period as well, if you want to be able to shorten that period. And that's where having the testing capacity matters. So way back in April, before we were talking about opening up and there was this big conversation, the point was made very early on that if you want to open up, you have to have the capacity to test. That's vital. And here we are right now in January of 2021 with a massive outbreak, and you've got a backlog of cases spanning many, many weeks at this point in time. And on top of that, other countries from the outside are now telling you that to get back into those countries, you also have to get tested. So we have now a testing jam, a testing backlog. We don't have enough capacity. And it's really insulting in my view when you're now only seeing a prime minister at the 11th hour when Rome is burning, and you now decide to just pop in to see what's going on at the Ezra Long Laboratory. These people are working really hard. They're working really tired. I mean, and it's very unfair to them. And the people who we say, the frontline people who we call superheroes, we are not treating them right, because if we were, and the other frontline workers that we are not treating right in this entire matter are the very same hotel workers who are expected to go into those hotels, and we're dealing with high-risk persons, and we're not ensuring that their own health care is being protected through better testing and better quarantine. And that is still a failure up to today.
Indeed, Calix. St. Lucia, this is the first segment of Town Hall Tuesday. My guest, Calix George Jr., and the candidate for Ancillary Canneries, Mr. Wayne Gerard. We have to take a break, but we'll be right back. Welcome back to Town Hall Tuesday, St. Lucia. I'm your host, Mondi Lewis, and again, my guest, Mr. Wayne Gerard, the candidate for Ancillary Canneries, and Mr. Calix George Jr. We left speaking about just the whole COVID-19 crisis that St. Lucia is going through. The crisis is not only one of health, but economics. We have seen that the government has borrowed heavily, and we understand the borrowing, but we also expect that the borrowing, which he claims is for economic and his economic and resilience plan, should be for the people of St. Lucia. Absolutely none of that money borrowed was spent directly on St. Lucians. If you recall, the NIC was the one who had to put up over $100 million to provide economic relief. That is your pension money, my pension money, St. Lucia, and it needs to be paid back. Wayne, even from your background, and I know you're a finance man, you're a numbers guy, what do you believe, again, and we've spoken about it, but just remind St. Lucians about the implications of the use of, one, pensioners' money, and the fact that $548 million was borrowed for an economic resilience plan by this Prime Minister?
I think it is clear, and I'll say it in a language that the Prime Minister probably understands, since he's famous for always saying he runs the country like a business. It is clear that the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of our healthcare system. We cannot allow for the country to be directed based on the whims and fancies of what the Prime Minister perceives to be what is required for the economy. The borrowing that the Prime Minister has done, unfortunately, comes with a consequence in terms of the debt to GDP ratio. We, over the years, have seen that figure go up and go down through a series of rebasing, which the Prime Minister has done, and the Ministry of Finance. Now, it's very interesting that typically rebasing usually takes place between every 5 to 10 years if there is a structural change in the productive capacity of an economy. But the Prime Minister has, over the last 4 years, has done 2 rebasing exercises. So with regards to the true consequence of the quantum of the debt, you and I are not going to be sure until we actually get into government and actually have a look at the real figures. It's a very serious matter, and I think the Prime Minister needs to come clear and say exactly what it is. What is the actual debt to GDP ratio? Because it affects everyone, particularly the young people. It can be a situation where the young people are meant to be the perceived beneficiaries of growth in the economy, but yet still we can't measure whether or not they've received that benefit. However, they are the ones who are going to be the ones to pay that debt down in the future. So I think there should be some clarity from the Ministry of Finance and the Prime Minister in terms of what really is the true state of the finances of the country.
Well, I have from, I believe it was ECCB,
Yeah.
a 2016 debt to GDP of 60%. 20%. In 2020, we were looking at 85%, and in 2021, a projection of 95%.
But that includes the rebasing. So we're not quite sure if those figures are
Even
accurate
higher.
because
It's
they're
true. I
based
understand
on
what-
rebasing.
And there's a very worrying trend within that, which you're not even seeing from those figures. And that is committed debt, right? What you're seeing with that 95%, that is only reflecting what is actually drawn down from the various borrowers, right? So that's the official debt stock. But what you're not seeing is another $1.8 billion worth of committed debt. And it's probably even more than that. I'm not even including things like bonds and treasury bills, which we've been going and borrowing through the hilt. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, I used to play 2 games with my family a lot. One was Monopoly, and the other one was a game called Go for Broke. And it really does feel like the Prime Minister right now is going for broke, because the whole approach is to spend, 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 spend. And the question is, we don't have the space. When all other countries around the world are realizing you've got to prioritize, right? You've got to be able to ensure that you have enough money for times like this, like for periods when you've got to potentially go into a shutdown and you need to be able to provide support for working people, income support. And so it really is, again, a great crying shame that the Prime Minister came tonight and literally said on TV that the government has spent $8 million on income relief. $8 million out of that $20 million borrowed. That's 2.5%. That's way, way under what you need to do to be spending. But yet still, we can't find enough money to do proper testing. We can't find enough money to ensure that the isolation facility, Victoria Hospital, is properly running. We don't have enough support for OKEU. Because the issue with COVID is that it's sapping resources from the rest of your health sector.
Correct.
We have doctors and nurses who are sick, who are burnt out, who are very much concerned about what is going on right now. They haven't got any kind of raise, but here they are working time in, time out, putting themselves at risk. Other people putting themselves at risk. EMT, police officers, they're all doing that, right? But we're not seeming to prioritize those things right about now. We're on a spending spree building roads. A good friend of mine posted today, well, you should give the Prime Minister credit because at least we will be driving to the emergency room on smooth roads.
If we can find an ambulance. But if we could find an ambulance,
I think it's I think it's
absolutely.
important for the Prime Minister to draw between this distinction of important and urgent. We're not saying that the roads are not important, that the international airport is not important, but it's not urgent. Do we actually need them at this particular point in time? And that's the distinction I think he needs to make between urgent and important. Yes, those things are important, but are they urgent and necessary at this particular point in time is where the challenge is for me.
Perhaps I missed it. Did the Prime Minister provide an economic relief program to the country? I'm just asking, and genuinely, I probably missed it. Anyone of you?
Right, so the attitude is go to work, come back, be home before 7 and stay at home. That's the attitude that we're given right about now. That's the response. There is no more money. I think we've all heard since October, November, the Prime Minister said, we've got no more money, the country's broke, and we'll continue to build roads, and we'll continue to start a $600 million airport, because that's where the priorities are right about now. And it's sad because this is all being driven by profiteering. There's no other way of putting it.
But Calix, I
Because
saw
these
an argument by the Prime Minister and his surrogates that, roads spur construction. And I don't know.
Yeah, but that issue of trickle-down economics is not going to work.
But Calix, that's what I wanted to know, if my econ degree is gone to waste, because I cannot understand on something that is so heavily, it's not even labor-intensive.
Materials,
equipment, things that
all
are
of
not
which
even
is
from
imported.
St. Lucia. Precisely. Basic economics.
And so the actual benefit in terms of salaries, in terms of payroll, could be as low as 10, depends on the type of construction,
Yeah.
but it could be 10, 15% maybe?
18 to 20%.
Right, so
Yeah.
20, let's say a quarter,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Or
A fifth.
20%.
Yeah.
So that's clearly nowhere near. So you're spending $200 million on roads, And maybe 40 million of that, if that much, is going to ever get into the hands of St. Lucians at this point in
But
time.
it's very sad that we now have to guess how much we're spending on roads. St. Lucians, we are not in a good place. What on earth prevents us from knowing the actual cost of roads in St. Lucian? The problem is there is no tendering. There are billboards being put up after the roadworks have commenced, and there's no amount given to that. I mean, this is just unheard of. And again, a very sad place for St. Lucians to be. And Calix, I know you were part of a panel which was saying that, which spoke that Kenson Kazimi hosted about the cost of roads, especially within the pandemic. What are your thoughts? And I mean, we heard Wayne really articulated very well that the difference between urgent and important.
Right. Well, I mean, it's not that you can't be putting money into construction, but one would hope that you're putting money into construction that is going to help your current crisis. So here you have a situation where you still don't have a St. Jude hospital completed. You clearly have issues in terms of your capacity in a lot of other
And
areas.
the St. Jude's Hospital,
You know,
as you
but
brought
what-
it up, Calix, you know, I'm sorry for interjecting, but again, Honorable Philip JPS spoke to a facility in the south of the island to complete the east wing so that we can have an isolation center because VH is overwhelmed. We don't have any more space. Like you're saying, okay, construction to assist in this crisis, and a hospital will always be needed. Where is the thinking? Who is advising him?
But coming back to some of the needs you see, like for instance, testing. Here we have a situation right about now where we don't have enough testing. We're only testing maybe about 150 tests per day for PCR. We clearly need to ramp up testing. When you're looking at the positivity rates which are coming back, it suggests that you're not doing widespread testing. And so we have this massive requirement right about now. And this is nothing that was not known from since April. This is my point, you know. We've known this, we've had enough time to put things in place. And for us to be now rushing to try to get it done, you know, to put the horse back into the stable is clearly showing that we are not prepared. And it's very sad because, you know, the way I see it, I'm pretty certain we would have had a lot of testing done if a minister's wife owned a lab. Because had that been the situation, we probably would have had testing being done for every single St. Lucian,
Yes.
regardless. You know, we'd have probably been, 300,000, 500,000 tests done. When we right now behind Barbados, behind even St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you know, in terms of testing. So we really are behind. We are not performing well. And this whole idea, you can't argue with success. Well, it's pretty clear what has happened right about now. We've gotten to the point where we have clearly failed. And I really have to make this point, that the Prime Minister came to the country in 2016 and he said that he was going to keep the country, he was going to make the country safe. He was going to make the country safe again. That was the message. And at the time, he was, of course, referring to crime, right? But we've seen what has happened to crime. We just had our second worst homicide year on record. The one before, 2017 was the worst 60 homicides.
60.
Right now, if you look at the trends that we're going on, we're looking at possibly having another 2020 in terms of homicides. And now we're facing this crisis. 16 persons who have now died from COVID-19 in St. Lucia, COVID-19 related deaths, right? One just recently, poor family having to live with the loss of their 21-year-old son. And so many other individuals who have already died, which we have not even come to count as yet.
Yep.
And I mean, a good doctor who I see that her post every time, it reminds us, right about now, we're seeing one death in St. Lucia from COVID every 55 hours, right? And the thing about deaths that we have to appreciate when we're dealing with COVID, they are going to lag behind the numbers. So we're seeing the numbers rising. We're now at 1,479 cases, and that's going to continue to rise, no doubt about it, as we finally get through a lot of the backlog of cases. And then the deaths are also going to unfortunately come because, again, the science pretty much tells us that. And we also know the situation with our isolation facility, with Victoria Hospital, and the condition that people are afraid to go to the hospital. I mean, men generally are afraid to go to seek out any kind of medical attention, but people are genuinely right now afraid to consider getting COVID because they don't even want to deal with that hospital reality. And of course, you know what that means quite often? They delay going in, they end up waiting for things to get really, really bad, and then we're seeing people dying en route to the hospital. So this is not a situation that we should be in right about now. It is a very unfortunate situation that people aren't feeling safe. And when we're dealing with economics, when we're dealing with workforce, right? What about health and safety? This is not the 1920s and 1930s. This is 2021. Health and safety of your workforce matters. You need to be able to protect people and ensure that they are safe on the job. And if they are not safe on the job, what happens is that they will stay home.
Like you, and even Wayne, we see a lot of persons saying that they have to work, especially in the hotel sector. So don't close the borders. You know, people believe that we don't have an alternative. That you guys are just saying close the borders, but I have to work. And solutions, it's not an either or. The government has a duty to protect its citizens. The government has a duty to use the economic relief that it has been given to take care of its citizens. And I want people to understand that. We understand also that tourism accounts for over 40% of our GDP. And some people believe that right now is a time to do better, to do differently. And Wayne, what are your thoughts in terms of where do we go from tourism? We understand that it's always going to be a part of us. It's beautiful. We want people to come here. But what next? What else? People, I think, they can't get past the current structure. But what are some of the ideas that you think that we can tap into to really revitalize this economy and to get people to engage in more sustainable activities?
I think now is a perfect time for us to pivot insofar as what our desires are. At the moment, the fascination with the current Minister of Tourism is to have as many people come through St. Lucia, even if they're not spending as much as, say, when they go further north into the Caribbean. So now is a perfect time for us to sit back and consider, is it a situation where we continue to go for this situation where we have a high volume of tourists of little value, or we go for a low volume or high value tourists? It's a question we need to ask. And it's a question we could only ask if the information is truthful and made available. There have been several reports that have been done in the area of tourism, suggesting that this notion of trying to get to this $1 million mark in terms of total number of tourists may not necessarily redound to the benefit of the citizens of the country. One could only imagine what happens to the usage of water, the time spent in traffic when the cruise ship is in the harbor. There are lots of considerations that we need to consider. But the question is, we could only do that with the accurate and appropriate information. And at the moment, the way the government is acting, nothing is transparent. Everything is opaque. And we're left to guess as to what it is has to happen. But insofar as whether or not tourism is here to stay, of course, we're not saying to get rid of tourism. We made a transition from bananas to tourism. Similarly, we could make a transition from tourism to something. What that something is could be a series of things. It could be we get deeper into light manufacturing. It could be that we take into consideration this whole new fourth industrial revolution with regards to the use of technology. I mean, there's a reason why St. Lucia has dropped over the last years in the ease of doing business. There are some things that we're just not doing right. And with a little imagination and some hard work, we could get things done and back in order.
Okay.
But I just want to also, Mondi, I mean, I know, yes, the tourism, of course, is very important, and we want to see it get back to business. But that's the point. We want to see safe tourism.
Yes.
But even with respect to that, you have other countries which are just on the same level as us. And again, I have to go back, Mr. Girard, to the Seychelles in the Indian Ocean, because they're smaller than us, 100,000 people.
Correct.
They've got the same dependency regarding, tourism and whatnot. And you know what? They were able to find the money to be able to ensure that their people remain safe and were able to survive. I think they spent, about 143 million Eastern Caribbean dollars in the first year. They've got another $100 million, which they're going to be spending for 2021. And that's going to be done through a sort of a co-payment thing, working with businesses to be able to ensure that people can keep their jobs and people can survive. That's what responsible government has to do, because at times you will have to be able to realize that you've got to pivot and that it's simply not safe to be able to just simply go back to business as usual, right? And
Correct.
there are ways, of course, that we can have a productive tourism sector, but it cannot be without applying the proper science of quarantine and testing. We've seen countries, all the countries that have been able to handle and manage COVID successfully, whether it's Taiwan, whether it's New Zealand, whether it's even neighboring Dominica, they have put in the necessary protocols to ensure that you've got testing on arrival, you get tested 5 or 6 days after of the PCR test, and then you can allow persons to be able to go out and actually enjoy a much more fulfilling kind of tourism than what we have right now. Because what we have right now is all-inclusive hotels, effectively.
Right.
We don't have tourism. People are not going out and spending money with vendors and restaurants and bars and making that kind of economic imprint that we are accustomed to seeing. So what is going on there is not even about true tourism. This is about
Correct.
protection of a particular enclave
Correct.
within the hotel sector. And not even all of hotels, particular enclave of the hotel sector.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. George. St. Lucia, I have to go to my second break, but we'll be right back and we'll be taking some calls. So please come back to Town Hall Tuesday. Welcome back to Town Hall Tuesday, St. Lucia. Again, my guest, Mr. Wayne Gerard, the candidate for Ancillary Canneries, and Mr. Calix George Jr. So we've spoken about a number of issues. We first spoke about the COVID-19 crisis in St. Lucia, and we've gone into the economic crisis because they're both affecting us at the same time. And we touched briefly on the crime crisis that is plaguing this country. We saw the unrest at the Borderley Correctional Facility today. We saw a gruesome murder probably about a week or two ago, and we have yet to get any confirmation from the police. I recall that the police sent out a notice for persons to, if they were missing a loved one. But again, the follow-up, even just saying what has happened with the case, silence. St. Lucians, we have to keep on the issues because that is the only way we are going to get the answers that we deserve as a country. I'm going to go back into more of the economic implications of the COVID-19 crisis. We see no relief coming from the government, nothing for the creative industries, nothing from the small and micro businesses, which have had to close for the last 10 days and which probably will be closed for the next 10 days. Guys, tell me, we saw the moratorium last year. Do you think anything has changed right now that St. Lucians can now pay their bills on time? And do you even think that a second moratorium should be on the cards?
I think it's gotten progressively worse. The more you have to deal with, and it's not just from the finance point of view. The anxiety breeds a certain level of concern. And if you were unemployed 6 months ago, and you're still unemployed 6 months on, it only reasons to suggest that whatever savings that you may have had would have been spent. So your situation is even more acute now. But I want to go back to a very interesting point, Mondi, that, with regards to this whole tourism approach. It is rather curious that Sandals was able to advertise their opening date before we St. Lucians knew that the country was going to be reopened. This entire agenda is driven purely on the economics for the benefit of a few. And we need to impress upon our members of parliament, the Prime Minister, to be very direct with the information. There is nothing wrong in saying to the country, we got it wrong. There's nothing wrong with saying you got it wrong. If he needs help, engage the leader of the opposition, engage civil society, and stop going on this attitude as if nothing else, no one else matters, except securing the financial interests of the very few.
What certainly hurts a lot of St. Lucians is the belief and the feeling that they're in a sort of a new tourism apartheid. You know, visitors, they can stay in hotels and they can drink a little pina colada, they can drink rum, but a person can't go to a rum shop in Monrepo and drink a tea posh, like the Prime Minister likes tea posh, right? That, I think, is what is getting at a lot of people. This sort of double standard that we are creating in this country. And it's not good for business either. Because when you even look at, I mean, Dominic Fede, our Minister for Tourism, made the point once that we have a rum culture. And I know you got a lot of flack for that. But the truth is, in terms of our manufacturing sector, a lot of what we produce are alcoholic beverages, whether it's the WLBL or the distillers. These two are major contributors to the economic activity in terms of exports. But you know, at the end of the day, they depend very heavily on the local market,
Yes,
you know, for their own sustenance. So when we're looking at some of these policies sometimes, and you know, what about all the people who would have wanted to be digital nomads, who would have wanted to come here and stayed long in St. Lucia for a month or maybe 6 weeks or whatever the case may be. They stayed, they came down for 2 weeks, they spent 2 weeks in quarantine so that they can enjoy St. Lucia. And you're now saying that they can't enjoy St. Lucia, right? They can't go and have a Spirit of St. Lucia in Ancillary or in Canaries, you know? I mean, how does that really work out? So we're making these policies as if they are only for a particular sector. So when you have a Mr. Fede coming in and saying, well, you know, certain people can drink, but others can't. I mean, this type of approach is certainly not useful, and it's creating a bitter taste in a lot of people's minds right about now, that this thing is more driven by the economic pursuits of a few than the benefit of most.
Now, I wish to represent Ancillary and Canaries. Given where we are the ones who are going to suffer most if the Prime Minister continues to go along the way he is doing. The World Bank produced a report, the Poverty and Shared Prosperity Report 2020. And it makes very clear that 5 years immediately after a pandemic, things get progressively worse for those at the bottom of the ladder. 5 years.
Yeah.
So the Prime Minister will be long gone. He will be having his, whatever it is, going back to where he's a product of, where we will have to deal with the consequences of his clumsiness and his incompetence. So I think we should be very, very, very careful and listen very intently. I know it's easy for some to say the Labour Party is only saying this when we're in government. But when we're in government, we could demonstrate that we were able to grow the economy to 8%. We've demonstrated that. We've demonstrated that we've been able to bring down our fiscal deficit. What has the Prime Minister been able to demonstrate over the last 5 years? That he has the pension to borrow. Because at the end of the day, he is not responsible for paying it back. It is us, the people of St. Lucia, not him. So we need to think very carefully about how we decide to proceed going forward. Is this a government, a Prime Minister that really cares about us, about our livelihoods, about our lives? Does he really care? I think the jury has already come back. And I think when he says we've failed for not being obedient and not following the protocols, I think he is the one who's failed and not being obedient to his very own manifesto, which he promised a changed world for the people of St. Lucia. At the moment, we're not seeing it, we're not feeling it, even before COVID.
Yes, you're so right. I mean, Calix was bringing the point in, and I know even within your own constituency, and I personally feel that way, that there are different rules for different persons. You see, and I just read a comment, a tweet actually, of from a young lady who felt that, you know, influencers are coming to St. Lucia. People are coming into St. Lucia with fake COVID-19 tests. Guys, this is a real thing. And what is the process by which we verify that? I don't know the process, and I will say that outright. What is the process? But it is a known fact that persons, and it has been reported internationally, that people are faking COVID-19 results. And from what I am told, this happened right here in St. Lucia, yet you hear St. Lucians are responsible. You hear about backdoor. You hear there's no. It's like as if our policies they're tight. They're good, and I think this is breeding a sort of discontent and real animosity in the country that we can ill afford. I don't know if you get this sense also. What is the feeling, the sense in your constituency, Wayne, with St. Lucians generally? What do you think people feel like?
Yet again, we made to suffer the consequence of the interests of a few. I mean, there are very interesting statistics and calculations that if the government want to seriously put to the people of St. Lucia that they are caring and concerned about them, there are simple things that the government could do and produce to demonstrate that we are important to them. The Prime Minister's and the government's first priority should always be to the people of St. Lucia. Closing the borders for 2 weeks once you give prior notice to the airlines, because I don't want to give the impression that the Prime Minister should wake up in the morning and just overnight close the country. No, he should be in dialogue with the various airlines and say to them, look, this is a serious concern for my country. This is what obtains. We're going to have to do X, Y, and Z for a defined period. There's nothing wrong with that. All the other countries are now doing it without any hesitation. Why can't we do the same? It's one thing to say we need the economy to reopen to protect livelihoods. But if people are dying, there's not going to be any economy that exists, because people need to be present to benefit and make the economy work. If they're not there, then nothing's going to happen. So we need to recalibrate and think about what is important to us and what is important to the people of St. Lucia.
Indeed. Calix, do you have any thoughts to share? We didn't hear, that's one of the announcements we didn't hear today, that the borders will remain open, but St. Lucians, you are under a curfew. And you need to be home, businesses, you need to close.
Right. And my take on this is that if we are going to say that tourism or any sector, whether it's the BPO sector, call centers, any sector that wishes to remain open, we have to ensure that health and safety is protected, right? So if we want to consider that those are essential services, then we need to treat them as such. In other words, you need to ensure that there's widespread screening, testing that's going on, that people are actually being tested. And the recommended rate is really doing 2 rapid tests a week, right? That's the recommended rate in high risk environments. So if we're saying that this is what it is, right? Let's do that, okay? But let's ensure that we have the resources that are necessary to do that, whether it's through a partnership of the hotels themselves and the sector, whatever. Let's go the route of Jamaica. Let's introduce a travel insurance to be able to cover the cost of this. There are means and ways. There are so many examples of best practice around the world, right? Grenada has started a requirement. You've got to book a minimum of 7 days to travel. I think you've got a call, actually. But, 7 days to travel. And so that allows you to ensure that people stay longer in your destination. And that's exactly what you want. You want people to be able to stay longer, meet their quarantine requirements, ensure that they're safe, and then they can go out and make an economic impact in the country.
Correct.
Okay, do we have a call still? Sorry, I wasn't hearing. But anyway, St. Lucians, the number is 4560306. You can call in to pose questions to our guests. And again, we've been discussing the COVID-19 crisis in St. Lucia, the pandemic, and the ensuing health and economic crisis. Just so much to deal with. And let's just segue into the crime that we've seen. And Calix, I think you touched on it. The record number for 2017, we had 60 homicides. 2020 recorded 55. To date, we saw a gruesome murder, and we just saw real disaster at the Borderley Correctional Facility. Again, it cannot be a coincidence that all of this is happening, and then you have talks of the Commissioner of Police being transferred, something that is unconstitutional as far as I know. What are our thoughts on this the involvement? And we heard Jeremiah Norbert speak about that this morning, about the political interference in the police force. Have any of you heard anything, been speaking to anybody? Wayne, do you have any comments on, again, political interference?
There's a call, I'm not sure if you want to take it, do you?
Yeah.
The crisis. Sorry, I'm not hearing.
There's a call on the line, yeah.
Good evening.
Sorry, callers, I'm not really hearing very well, so I'm unable. So maybe Calix and Wayne will be able to direct the calls once they come through. Again, 4560306. But Calix, do you want to speak about the crime crisis, as far as I'm concerned, because it's three crises.
Well, right, we're facing a
ensuing.
lot of different crises at the same
Yes.
time. It's quite unfortunate as a country because clearly we're seeing a lot of persons who are very, very frustrated. We've got a lot of issues at the social level. Social peace is not there. It's breaking down, and we need to address that. And so that's why you have to ensure that you have that kind of social stability to be able to support your country. Now, what is going on at the prisons at Bord Lake Correctional Facility is particularly concerning because effectively what you have at the Bord Lake is the largest residential institution on the island. And so it's a major high-risk area. And so we have to deal with it with special care, just like in the case of Barbados where they had an outbreak. I think we have a call on the line.
Good evening, caller.
Good evening.
Good evening, caller.
I was not going to talk to you, fella.
Yes, caller, go on.
Hello?
Go on, caller. I'm just not hearing you very well, but I believe the others can.
Oh, okay. I wasn't hearing. Yes, I was just saying that again, it's this whole COVID situation. I get the feeling like it's just a catch-22, where you have economic devastation on one end, and you have a health devastation on the other end, and you have to get the balance, try and slide the scale rule to see where you can balance it, because you cannot do both of them. And the thing about it is, depending on your argument, because again, with politics and with people in general, you will be picking a side. That's always it's always divided. As much as we could think and want a utopian society, people will always be divided, and people will pick a side when they want to bolster their argument. And if something is done to benefit health, you will hear people lamenting the economy. If something is done to benefit the economy, they will lament health. And that is just what is happening. I've been observing it, and it is what is happening. Because you literally cannot work with both of them. You cannot benefit both of them.
But caller, if I may just interject, if you don't mind, I think you can strike a balance. You know, this is not, you know, there was a time where before we used to talk about, well, it's either the environment or development. There's sustainable development. And so I think you can strike a balance between the economy, maintaining the economy, growing the economy, while ensuring that you have healthy people.
But still, people will raise issues, even though when something will have to suffer, everybody cannot benefit.
Right, and
whether it be shutting down,
exactly that.
Whether it be shutting down and people by the market suffer, guess what? If you want to argue against what's going on, you're going to raise the point that the people by the market are suffering.
But
while somebody else will be benefiting, all you're going to focus on is the people by the market are suffering, and that is what you're going to use to bolster your argument. And because, well, like I said, when people argue things, they minimize what goes against the argument and they exacerbate what goes for the argument.
Caller, if you had a member of your family that was not well, would you not prioritize the health of that individual before you go and you buy a luxury car?
But, okay.
And that's what we're dealing with right now. We're going out and we want to spend money on a $600 million airport, which is not necessary. We're going out and we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on roadworks.
But what if the person who will stand to benefit from the airport, or the taxi driver, or whoever, those other persons, they don't have sick people in their family, they are going to say, do the airport.
No, but caller, the taxi driver right now is thinking about paying his mortgage. Is thinking about paying his vehicle loan. He's not even being able to do those basic things. So and we're not providing. Building the airport is not going to help him, caller. It's not going to help him.
So what is he going to do? Get money in his hand right now? And then the airport doesn't get built, and then what happens? Like
caller,
in the
there were
5
ways
years?
that the airport could have gotten built, and we've spoken about those issues in terms of a public-private partnership where we didn't have to take on the risk.
That's very
technical. No, it's not technical, caller. It's practical. It's responsible. There's a big difference.
Technical? Because when people start getting technical, then they have to go into the nitty-gritty of the agreements and the payment percentages and all of those things.
Caller,
just go- just
at
a
the
second.
end of the day, the building an airport right now is not benefiting the taxi driver. It's not benefiting the hotel
guess who it's
worker.
benefiting?
It's
It's
not
benefiting-
benefiting. It is only going to be benefiting construction companies who are perhaps directly involved and whoever else. And you know what?
And
The
whoever-
reality
and
is,
whoever
caller,
else.
with all
Who are
those
the-
types
who are the
of
whomever else?
and caller, with all those types of big projects, invariably there's a lot of corruption. We can just go back to Trinidad and Piarco.
Okay.
You can go to a lot of
All
other
right.
places, and you
I'm
know the
glad-
reality of the corruption they call
I'm glad you brought up corruption. So is it like fundamental that whenever a big project is going on, corruption comes in hand with
The
it?
risk is greater. That's the point.
Which
caller.
is
do
why
a smaller
a Labour
project.
Party
To
government,
do a smaller project.
which is why a Labour Party government had allowed for the World Bank to tender said project, and we agreed on a PPP, so that the government would have no dealings with building the airport, and it would have been a risk by a private company.
Right now, you have a direct award.
Yes,
no,
exactly.
No public tendering. That's what you have right now, caller.
Again.
No, again, it's wrong, caller. That's what it is. It is unethical and it is wrong, and we need to be able to say so.
I do really want to get into
You
politics.
don't want to get into it, and you don't want to get into the nitty-gritty because it's wrong, caller. That's the problem.
So explain this to me. There's this famous clip where, again, it's not political, but where Dr. Kenny Anthony was going to say something went wrong and they could not raise money. What went wrong?
Well, caller, I'm glad you're raising that, caller, because at the time, you know what went wrong, caller? We had a very high debt to GDP ratio. It was increasing. Further to that,
Why was it increasing?
Because, caller, the last government, right, the King administration went out, it borrowed a lot, and in fairness to it, in some instances, it had to borrow because of Hurricane Thomas recovery.
Thank you very much.
But in addition to that, it went out and borrowed way too much. And we were, and then we, and we were at a point, we were at a point
What
at
is
a,
way too much?
but wait,
You were
caller,
not there.
you're not even allowing me
You
to
did not know
finish.
Carry on.
So we were at a point, therefore, where our bills coming in were much greater than our revenue. So we had something called a massive fiscal deficit, right? And that meant that we were not able to sustain. We were at a point where we were heading in the wrong direction. And so therefore there had to be corrections. That's why you saw things like VAT. And that's what, that context of what Dr. Anthony made that statement on was on that basis, caller. And you know what's going to happen? When we're talking about 90%, 100% debt to GDP, we're going to go right back into that trap. We're going to go right back into it, caller.
Alex, thank you for that contribution. And caller, thank you for calling, but we have to move on, and because we're actually out of time for the show and we need to wrap up. But thank you very much for your contribution. Gentlemen, we have to wrap up. Calix, let's do some final words from you. And I know we're out of time, but some final words from you, Calix. And Wayne will go to you. So 30 seconds.
Right. Well, it's not a very good situation that we're in right about now. People don't want to talk about what the projections are looking like, but clearly the trend right about now is that our cases are increasing. Not just that our cases are increasing, the rate at which our cases are increasing is also very great, right? So we're accelerating right about now. Our testing is inadequate. It's a major problem. The reality is, unfortunately, the only thing that can really make a serious dampening of what we're doing is to consider a very strict lockdown, which is exactly what has occurred with Barbados, and is exactly what has been done in most places. You've got to completely extinguish the fire. But you can't just extinguish the fire. You also have to make sure that the fire does not come back. So you also have to address the causes of that fire. And of course, that is largely because we are importing cases, because we have a faulty quarantine and testing requirement for persons coming in. What the Prime Minister announced tonight was not enough to address those matters. And so we really have to ensure that what we're doing right now is to address all these things. And it has to be done integratedly, and it has to be done using scientific rigor. And unfortunately, we are not seeing that at this moment.
Mr. Gerard, your closing statement?
I think it is important for us to recognize, it is once said that the moral character of a government is judged by how it treats its citizens in the dawn of their life, which is our young children, the twilight of their life, which is our elderly, and the shadow of our life, which is those who are poor, vulnerable, and differently able. I think the answer is clear that this government has absolutely no desire to help out those who really need the help. If that was the case, we wouldn't be debating whether or not the airport should be open or closed. Whatever loss that we will occur economically does not come anywhere near to what happens if we continue to lose valuable lives. And that is the key message. The difference is whether we decide which is important, the livelihoods of St. Lucians or the lives of St. Lucians. It doesn't mean that they're mutually exclusive, because if you're alive, you could always rebuild and build your economy. But if we're gone, what's going to happen? And that is the key message for me this evening, for us to decide what it is more important to us.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining me on Town Hall Tuesday. St. Lucians, please remember to wear your mask, social distancing, stay home, and follow all the protocols which the government has in place. We ask you all to take care of your family and each other. And remember, register to vote. That is the only way you can make a difference. Make sure that everyone in your household, your friends, are registered to vote so that we can get Alan Chastanet out for once and for all. Thank you for joining me for Town Hall Tuesday. I'm your host, Mondi Lewis, and that's it. Good night.